Good evening, everyone. It's Blair Miller here, along with Carly Barnett, and we are here in the ANF Plus studios and bringing you live coverage from today's major breaking story involving President Biden dropping out and making that announcement here earlier this afternoon. And Carly, just what a bombshell. You know, there's been certainly rumblings of this over the past few days, and there was speculation that this could come this weekend, but still a shock for so many people across this country.
Absolutely. I mean, this has obviously been in the talks actually for several weeks now. Many prominent Democrats actually urging the president to step down, step aside in order for someone else to step into that position or to step into the candidacy for that position. And we are hearing that as late as last night, he was still trying to say, hey, I can continue to do this. Hey, I intend to run. But it seems as though with mounting pressure and with the latest polling numbers, it seems as though that he listened to the calls from the people within his party to ultimately do just that. And we have seen in that time, so much has transpired. He steps down and he throws his support moments later behind his Vice President, Kamala Harris.
Yeah, this is really interesting how it played out, and some of the reporting, as you point out from CBS News, you know, President Biden has this inner circle that if you listen to some of his supporters, he has his campaign aides, but then he has this inner circle of fellow lawmakers, family members who he's listened to over the years who have given him advice, and this is something he was working through with them last night. And some of the reporting out there is that Vice President Harris wasn't even aware of this until today when she got the call from the president. He also made a call to the chief of staff and his campaign chair, informing him of his decision before 1 o'clock here this afternoon. And since then, you know, Vice President Harris, you know, so much focus on what happens from here, has really been trying to quickly shore up support, because that is going to be key in all this. And many political analysts saying the next 24 to 48 hours will be key for the vice president as she starts to really try to, you know, get this nomination and works toward this, because this is not a done deal. Just because President Biden is saying that doesn't mean that that's what is going to happen. You know, she's been taking the phones, making her case to fellow Democrats, really in Congress, to make sure she is shoring up that support, because we'll see what happens over the next day as lawmakers return there to the Capitol in Washington.
Well, let's go ahead and hear from Kamala Harris. She issued a statement. We have not gotten her on camera yet, but she issued a statement that reads, in part, that on behalf of the American people, I thank Joe Biden for his extraordinary leadership as President of the United States and for his decades of service to our country. She goes on to say, I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. So she certainly thanked the president, and she also said in this statement, too, that it was a selfless and patriotic act, President Biden doing this to put the American people and our country above everything else, she said in that statement.
That statement, Carly, coming out soon after the president put out his statement here earlier today, and I think that's how many Americans found out about this, is his statement that he put out. In fact, one person reached out to me and said, is this real? You know, saying, is this legit? And we can show you that statement from the president that came out here a little earlier. Here it is on your screen right now. And if you haven't dug into this, you know, the part of it that really is, you know, the guts of this, he's talking about how he's made this decision. And he says, it's been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. Quickly, we heard from Republicans on this, and they were questioning, okay, what's behind this? Is it just from his aides who are saying he's not faring well enough in the polls, or is there something bigger of a concern here being his health? And, you know, I heard critics saying quickly, did you see the president sign this letter that we're showing you? Have you seen pictures of that out there yet? Of course, that's not out there yet. We haven't seen that.
Now, it is important to note, too, that the president is recovering from COVID-19. He has been home making these calls and still recovering. He's been isolating at home. So there are questions right now to the president's health. At this time, we have heard from his doctors who say that he is continuing to recovering, but that he is recovering well. And we know that he has been taking medication as well to recover from COVID-19. So it will be interesting as we continue to hear more about the conversations that were had. I believe it was CBS News that reported that the president was not going to listen to political pundits. He was going to listen to, quote, real people. So it will be interesting to see who are those real people in his circle that helped him to ultimately come to the decision in order to step aside.
And so many questioning what happens from here, because as I pointed out, this is not a done deal. Just because President Biden is saying is that doesn't mean this is a done deal. You know, keep in mind, Harris was part of a crowded Democratic field that was vying for the nomination back in 2020, including President Biden, who went on to be the president. But before Biden picked her as his running mate, if Harris is officially at the top of the ticket, you know, there's a long list of potential VP contenders, all of whom have their own personal ambitions, and we can show you that list of possible picks. It's a long list, but some of these folks have tried to run for president before, have been unsuccessful. And if you really dissect this and look at some of this, there are folks who stand out in the Democratic circles, being Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, has a military background, former astronaut, and his wife Gabby Giffords, who certainly had a presence there in the Capitol. And then you look at folks like Gavin Newsom, who I remember being at the debate. He was there in the hall, you know, working the room with reporters, and he was waiting for a moment like this. But certainly, you know, some question if you can have two folks from California on the same ticket.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Gavin Newsom because he did just a short time ago tweet his support and endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris. He said, quote, "Tough, fearless, tenacious with our democracy at stake and our future on the line. No one is better to prosecute the case against Donald Trump's dark vision and guide our country in a healthier direction than America's Vice President Kamala Harris." This from Gavin Newsom.
Also on this list, as we show you this graphic here, is the Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and he's significant because a lot of political analysts have said that in order for Trump to win this race, or in order for Biden to win this race, now potentially Harris, that they need Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is really one of the key states in all of this, and it's why we'll see so much campaigning there. Certainly that would be a reason to bring Governor Shapiro onto the ticket, but it goes back to some of the name recognition. You go outside Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro doesn't have the name recognition, the instant recognition that those candidates need, with it being such a short time until the election.
Well, someone who has name recognition right here in our state of Georgia, of course, Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock. He has not said anything yet. We have not seen any statement from him at this point, but we do know that he is slated to appear in Savannah tomorrow. Now, Senator John Ossoff, his counterpart, Georgia Senator John Ossoff, he did tweet and he did endorse Harris. John Ossoff saying that President Biden's record and decades of service to the country are extraordinary and historic. So he first thanked the president. Then he goes on to say Vice President Harris is now absolutely the right candidate to defeat Donald Trump and unite our country. Kamala Harris is prepared and ready to win and has my full support. This is a statement that he made on Twitter.
You know, we talk about the conventions. We're just coming off the Republican National Convention, and now all eyes really turn to the Democratic National Convention. And as most people know, that's why this decision probably came today, because time was really running out as far as Democrats to line up on there. And what's not clear right now is if all of Biden's delegates will line up behind Harris, because what this puts the convention really into more of what it's designed to do. Typically, when you go to these conventions, everything's all buttoned up and it's really more of a formality. Now, the convention's really going to be playing out. Delegates don't have to fall in line with Vice President Harris. There could be potentially another candidate that pops up tomorrow and says, you know, let's say maybe Chris Christie or someone like that who jumps on and says, I'd like a chance at this. That would muddy the waters, and that would create an open convention, an open process. Some have even suggested there could be some kind of candidate debates. But keep in mind, the Democrat National Convention takes place in Chicago August 19th. So we're talking less than a month here. Do they have time to do something like that? And does it put Democrats on the same page? And that's what some critics are very concerned about when some Democratic strategists will say Democrats need to line up quickly. And that's why you're seeing Vice President Harris make those calls now, trying to shore up that support as quickly as they can. And as you're pointing out some of the statements, that's why it's key to look at who's come out supporting. And there's some Democrats in Washington who so far have said they're not going to say officially where they stand at this point, letting the process play out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it definitely brings a different level of gravitas to the Democratic National Convention. Of course, we're just days after the Republican National Convention, where they did have a ticket that they could all rally behind. They did have more of that fanfare that they could get behind, and I think that there are going to be a lot of questions still leading up to that, but they have about a month to do it, so we'll see what happens in that month in order to get prepared for the Democratic National Convention.
You and I were talking before we came on here, in between after the 6:30 newscast and here, talking about history, and you were looking into, so many of us, we've gotten into the election cycles and everything's buttoned up months, if not years in advance, and we know who the candidate's going to be. But that hasn't always been the case. This has happened before, certainly not in this fashion. This is the latest this has ever happened, but it has happened before.
In most recent history, it was Lyndon B. Johnson. He stepped aside. There was a lot of pressure during the time of the Vietnam War. We actually do have him saying that he would not be accepting his party's nomination.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president. I shall not.
And I believe that was in 1968. But this was a bit of a different circumstance because in that time, he was choosing to step away. And then before that, it was President...
Well, and I believe that was in March of that year, too. So there was a significant amount of more time than here we are in July, August.
And before him, it was Truman in 1952. He had pressures from the Korean War, as well as various other questions surrounding allegations of corruption there in his party. However, he also made the decision on his own accord and saying that they both, according to a New York Times article, were very heavily influenced by their wives and their encouragement in order to just come home, that they've done their service, and they bowed out, like you said, early. And so this is a very different set of circumstances in which right until the very, very last minute, it seems as though the president had every intention of continuing to be the party's nominee.
The key in all this is going to be how do voters respond. You can talk about the delegates, you can talk about the PACs and the money and where it goes, but voters are not going to be very happy if they see this being controlled by the lobbyists and corporate donors and the delegates. And when you've had 14 million voters already get behind President Biden, and now to shift waters or even do something else, it becomes concerning to voters. And we have heard from voters here early on. We had reporters out in the field talking with some of the voters. Here's some of the early reaction we were hearing.
Yeah, and I think it's about moral issues, honestly. And I think the Democratic Party is so lost.
I think Biden did a good job, but I think it's good we get some new blood in there.
And so there's some of the early reaction, and this is going to be something that plays out across offices and homes. It already is. With the reaction, a lot of people were surprised just to not only hear this, but to actually see it in writing. I heard a lot of people saying it's hard to see that. They didn't believe it would happen until it did.
And Blair, you were talking about the question of the money, and that is something that former President Donald Trump is questioning too, because he took to Truth Social, and he had this to say, quote, "So are we forced to spend time and money on fighting crooked Joe Biden? He polls badly and quits the race. Now we have to start all over again. Shouldn't the Republican Party be reimbursed?" And everybody around Joe, including his doctors and the fake news media, knew he was not capable as president. Just asking. So certainly the former president is questioning what takes place from here because, as you mentioned, people voted in the primary for President Joe Biden. So there are many people who have thrown their full support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. There may be people that are upset that it will not be Biden. And there may be people, like you said, that come out of left field and announce that they want to put their name in the hat.
Yeah, and that's a key part of this. And when you dig into this, looking at some of the numbers, Biden's campaign recently reported about $91 million cash on hand. But then campaign committees like Allied Democratic, they brought the total amount of disposable income to more than $240 million. That's sizable. And if you listen to campaign finance experts, they generally agree that Harris can control all of those funds pretty quickly, since the campaign was technically set up in her name, as well as Biden's. If Democrats do nominate someone other than Harris, party accounts could still benefit that nominee, but the Biden-Harris account would have more restrictions. For example, legal experts say it could become an independent expenditure political action committee, but not simply transfer its balance to a different nominee. So that's why you're seeing President Biden quickly endorse Vice President Kamala Harris, because the funding is sizable. And as we all know, that funding goes toward advertising, like states here in Georgia, and these visits.
And speaking of people who are endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris right here in Georgia, one of those is Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens. He first issued a statement on Twitter regarding the president stepping down, saying, quote, President Biden is an extraordinary American who has dedicated his entire life to working people. His incredible record on jobs, the economy, climate, reproductive rights, and his leadership on the world stage make him one of the most consequential leaders in history, saying Atlanta is stronger because of his leadership. Then he went on to tweet a picture of him and Vice President Harris saying, let's go. So he didn't necessarily put it into words, but I think that picture is as good as an endorsement of any, him alongside Vice President Harris. Also, a statement from the Democratic Party of Georgia Chair, Representative Nikema Williams. She issued a statement on behalf of the party, saying, quote, we thank President Joe Biden for his decades of public service. For the past 3.5 years, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have led our country's recovery from a global pandemic and made investments that have already created 30,000 new jobs in Georgia. She goes on to point at former President Donald Trump, saying we must defeat the twice impeached, failed 34-time convicted felon Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda. We stand firmly behind Vice President Harris to make that happen. So this is the Democratic Party of Georgia endorsing Vice President Harris.
On the Republican side, we heard from Burt Jones, who is Lieutenant Governor here in Georgia, and here's what he had to say. The Democrat establishment has succeeded in subverting the will of their voters. They can replace their nominee, but can't change the damage they've done to this border and economy. Republicans have never been more united, and the Democrats are a mess. See you in November. And it's key. You look at that statement, Carly, talking about the border and economy. Vice President Harris was tasked with being in charge of the border. That's certainly, the strategy is going to change for Republicans, and that will be something they go after her on. That's been a hot button issue for Republicans, is making this race about immigration, and that's something you can expect them to be pointing the finger directly at her, looking at, what was her role in all this. We also heard from the Georgia Senate Republicans, and this is their statement, with the majority leader putting this out a little earlier today. Any Democrat that steps forward to secure the nomination takes ownership of the disastrous Biden-Harris agenda. High inflation, an open border, rampant crime, and international weaknesses are the direct result of their shared policy failures. Pushing Joe Biden into retirement doesn't change the direction of the country. Only electing Donald Trump will get America back on the right path. So much of their focus with President Biden was focusing on his age. Is he fit for office? That's off the table. They can't really focus on that one with Harris, because that would be something Harris probably aims at former President Donald Trump. But that's some of the early reaction from Republicans that we're getting in.
And some of the issues that people are looking to the Democratic Party for, specifically Vice President Kamala Harris, we hear from the Young Democrats of America who endorse Kamala Harris. They issued their statement, and they were talking about how the Biden-Harris administration has made incredible strides in advancing the interests of America's young people, they say. This is a quote from them. This administration has addressed key issues including student debt forgiveness, climate change, reproductive health care, affordable housing, and LGBTQ plus rights. We are eager to see this work continue going forward, and we are proud to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris. So some of the issues you mentioned obviously are going to be highlighted by the Republican Party. These are some of the issues, particularly, especially for these young voters, these young Democrats of America. These are the issues that they are looking at, that they feel Vice President Kamala Harris embodies.
Reaction to this has, been swift here this afternoon, but I think there was a sense of shock, even among Democrats who've been working for the Biden campaign. I know instantly once this happened, I was texting with some of my contacts with the Biden campaign, and it was radio silence. They were not responding, which is very unusual when you talk to campaign aides, as you know as well. You quickly hear back from them. It was silent for a couple of hours, and at one point I was thinking, do they even have jobs at this point? How does this work? Right, exactly. And then they started getting back, and I think they had to figure it out at the same time. So there's a lot of questions about the logistics. How does that work? As far as transferring something over to the vice president? Maybe a little easier being the vice president, but something still that's kind of playing out. I know that's something we've been in the newsroom making a number of calls. Our Doug Reardon was just in Milwaukee focusing
Doug's
on
been busy.
Sorry.
Doug's
Well,
been
he
busy.
was stuck in the whole travel crisis that everybody's been, so many people have been facing, and had to go through so many cities just to get back here. But as soon as he got back here, this breaks down. This breaks out there, and so many people focused on that. And Doug's been talking with people about
Yes.
what this means. And here's a little bit of what he found here earlier today.
The total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol.
It all started right here in Atlanta.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence.
With a poor debate performance that weeks later has shaken up the race for president.
Well, it's a black swan event.
Dr. Ben Taylor with Kennesaw State University says delegates already pledged to Joe Biden through primaries and caucuses don't automatically belong to presumptive nominee Vice President Kamala Harris. She still has to earn them.
Now they will be open, the process will be opened up, and they will be able to vote their conscience.
That nominating process will happen at next month's Democratic National Convention. Ahead of that, there could be a series of town halls or meetings with delegates to shore up support for Harris. The VP, who's made half a dozen stops to Georgia since the beginning of the year, may have Republicans on their heels. She's a vastly different candidate than Biden, and the central question of age doesn't work for the GOP anymore.
They will have to go back to the drawing board on that. They will have to go back to the drawing board on their entire strategy in some sense.
This is the latest. A sitting president has dropped out of a race, and with less than 1 month until their convention and only 4 months until the election for Democrats.
Whatever happens has to happen very quickly.
That report from our Doug Reardon, fresh back from the RNC. He'll also be at the DNC, which will certainly look a lot different than what we saw with the RNC here last week. And he brought up something that you and I were talking about a little earlier, Carly, is about the amount of visits here to Georgia that we have seen from Vice President Harris. And the White House has been very forthcoming about this, saying she visits there more than anyone, and she's been very busy coming here to Georgia.
And they know that Georgia is a key state to winning this election. The Peach State is pivotal for this. In fact, Vice President Kamala Harris has visited Georgia, I believe it was 5 times just this year. And most recently in June, she visited twice in 1 week. One of those at a gun violence prevention rally, and then another one of those times at the 100 Black Men of Excellence conference. So that just goes to show how key they think our state is, how key they know our state is.
We saw that with the debate here that happened just 3 weeks ago, and you think about how much has transpired in 3 weeks since that debate. I was at that debate along with Doug, and going into it, everyone was saying this is going to be such a pivotal debate, and I don't think we really knew how pivotal it would be. But as the debate started, you could almost feel in the media room, the spin room as they call it, because that's where the surrogates and supporters for the candidates come before and after the debate to spin their candidate exactly how it sounds. Within minutes of it starting, you could feel it from the surrogates for President Biden. They were concerned and thought, what's going on? And so that debate, really just opening up what has been an avalanche of people being critical of President Biden, and they were supposed to debate again. Now all that's in question.
And that debate I was watching from a Georgia Republican watch party, Georgia GOP watch party.
That's right.
And on the flip side of that, there was great energy in that room. Madeline Montgomery, she covered the Democratic watch party. I was at the Republican watch party, and I spoke with chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, Josh McCoon, and he said that he thought Trump did a great job, and he was super energized after seeing Trump's performance in that debate. Now, Trump has come out and said that he does not want to take part anymore in the September debate unless it could be held on Fox News. He said that he felt that ABC News was biased and that he did not want to be taking part in a debate on that network. So it will be interesting to see if we're still going to see that same matchup between former President Donald Trump and whoever is the new candidate for the Democratic Party.
In the days after that debate, we heard from President Biden. He had done a number of interviews one-on-one with some of the network anchors talking about why he would get out of this race, and he talked about any kind of medical issues. He talked about an act of God, but he also talked about polling, and he had said he had not seen that polling yet that shows him something would be different. And I think we have some of the polling from CBS News, if we can bring it up and show you what we've been seeing out there, because that a lot of people question, can Kamala Harris be better than what we've seen from President Biden? Can she bring in more voters? Or is it a wash, or do they need someone else? And that was President Biden's point, being, is there someone else out there that can do better than he can? So apparently, maybe we don't have trouble pulling up those numbers, but it was looking at, some of the data has looked at saying, she can give a significant challenge to President Trump. And here's some of the numbers that we've seen from that recent CBS News poll.
And interestingly enough, this was actually taken
Right.
before
Right.
Biden had made his announcement today. Right now, Donald Trump with a narrow lead, but things looking pretty neck and neck if this is the ticket that people are voting on in November.
And so we'll have to see, how everyone responds to this over the next day. This kind of news coming out on a Sunday, it gives time for the campaigns to really get their ducks in a row as far as what they want to say, what they want their message to be. And as you and I were talking about here when we first came on air, is looking at who else is going to come out of the woodwork on this. Are we going to hear from someone like Cory Booker, or who are we going to hear from someone else? We've kind of gone through some of the endorsements and some of the key endorsements, but how does this unfold in the next 24, 48 hours? Analysts say it's truly going to be key for Kamala Harris and her campaign to get as much support as possible, make sure it's as public as possible, and it prevents anyone from coming forward to challenge her, because then we have to deal with the convention.
Right.
You're going to have delegates who are questioning this, and it's going to be different than anything we've seen.
Now, there are so many endorsements that we've seen for Vice President Kamala Harris. In fact, we have a list of all of these on AtlantaNewsFirst.com. We do want to direct you to our website, AtlantaNewsFirst.com, as well as our app. We have continuing coverage there. But there are also some key names that haven't endorsed the vice president yet. That includes former President Barack Obama, for one. He issued a very lengthy, very powerful statement commending President Biden in the wake of his withdrawal. But in that, he did not necessarily endorse Harris outright. That's not to say that she won't receive his endorsement eventually, but at least in this particular statement, it was not explicitly said there. Also, major Democratic leaders in Congress, like House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, they both issued statements thanking President Biden for his service, commending him for his service, but not going so far as to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris for the ticket.
Yeah, we know some endorsements not only came from Biden, but also former President Bill and Hillary Clinton, prominent U.S. senators, a wide swath of House representatives and members of the influential Congressional Black Caucus. Also Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, as we were talking about earlier, who's been speculation as a potential running mate, but you can believe it. In Washington tomorrow, every single senator and House lawmaker is going to be peppered with questions on where they stand on this. And if there's any wiggle room, that's certainly going to get a lot of attention from Democrats. We talk about Hakeem Jeffries. How does he lead in all this over at the House, and how does the Senate, lead on this as well?
So there are still a lot of questions tonight. This is really just the tip of the iceberg that we are getting tonight, and we know throughout the evening we are going to continue to get more and more information. We are going to be hearing from more prominent people, and we hope that you will continue to stay with us here on ANF Plus. We know that we are going to be giving you another update here at 9 o'clock. Then you can join us at 10 on Peachtree TV for Atlanta News First, as well as at 11 on Atlanta News First. We have live team coverage for you continuing the rest of this evening.
Yeah, we've been bringing extra reporters here today and producers to make sure we're bringing up the latest information on what comes out of Washington, what comes out of Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where the president lives and is right now. Of course, as we were talking, he has COVID, but he's saying he'll address the nation a little later this week to talk about this. And when will we see the first official on-camera response from Vice President Harris and former President Trump? All things that we are watching, and so we will be bringing you the latest here tonight at 10 and 11, and we'll be updating you here, as you said, on ANF Plus.
We've got you covered on all of it.
Have a good night. We'll be checking with you throughout the evening.